practice we did before lunch, and we'll go back to that practice. So remember that practice was the Shamatha practice, observing the mind. The mind is the object. And so the object there, of course, is the space of the mind plus whatever mental events are arising in that space. So to comment a little bit more about that, I'd like to again read from this book by Alan Wallace, Attention Revolution. On page 101, he says the following. And remember, he calls this practice settling the mind in its natural state. And he says the following. When you first begin the practice of settling the mind in its natural state, you may have difficulty identifying the intangible domain of the mind. Or even if you do settle your awareness there, after some time your attention may become vague, disoriented, or spaced out. If you have difficulty identifying the domain of the mind or sustaining attention there, consciously bring up a thought such as, "What is the mind?" and attend to it. Don't think about this question or try to answer it. Just observe the thought itself, watching it emerge in the field of consciousness and then dissolve back into that space. Once it's gone, keep your focus right where the thought was and see what comes up next. If you slip back into a kind of lax, mindless vacuity, deliberately generate the thought again and observe it with bare attention. When you become familiar with this practice, you will no longer need to generate such a thought to crystallize your awareness and locate your attention. That will happen by itself as thoughts arise and pass of their own accord. The practice of attending to the space of the mind and whatever events arise there is like taking a naturalist's field trip into the wilderness of your mind. When you first embark on this inward journey, you may perceive very little. But as you grow more accustomed to the practice, you will begin to identify an increasing quantity and range of mental phenomena. Some of them are discrete, like thoughts and images, while others are nebulous, like emotions and moods. This practice provides you with experiential access to a domain that cannot be observed with any of the instruments of modern science or technology. The most they can do is detect the neural and behavioral correlates of the phenomena you are observing directly. You have become a naturalist of the mind, and a whole new world is opening up to you that for most people remains largely unconscious. In this practice, the locus of awareness gradually descends from the superficial level of coarse mental activity that is immediately accessible through introspection, down into the inner recesses of the mind that are normally below the threshold of consciousness. You discover in this training that the border between conscious and unconscious mental events shifts in relation to the degrees of relaxation, stability, and clarity of attention. Especially when you engage in this practice for many hours each day, for days, weeks, or months at a time, you dredge the depths of your own psyche. In doing so, you remember long forgotten experiences, both pleasant and unpleasant, and a wide range of desires and emotions. What happens here is a kind of luminously clear discerning, free association of thoughts, mental images, memories, desires, fantasies, and emotions. You are plumbing the depths of your own mind, undistracted by external diversions. Once hidden phenomena are unmasked through the lack of suppression of whatever comes up. This is potentially an extraordinarily deep kind of therapy, and the more intensively you practice it, the more important it is to proceed under the guidance of an experienced, compassionate teacher. During your meditation sessions, internalize the wisdom of this contemplative tradition and make sure you implement the core instructions of this practice, which are: whatever arises in the mind, do not be carried away by it, and do not grasp onto or identify with it. Just let it be. Watch thoughts, feelings, or other mental events arise. With discerning intelligence, be aware of their nature, and let them slip back into the space of awareness without any judgment or intervention on your part. This is the key to letting the knots of the psyche unravel themselves as the extraordinary healing capacity of the mind reveals itself. This is the path to deep sanity. Any more questions about this practice before we go back to the practice? Yeah.
In the awareness of the mind, I was feeling very sleepy throughout. So what I could think of doing anything except watching the sleep, being aware of the sleep. So throughout the session, I was just doing awareness of sleep. Was this the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do?
The first line strategy, and we'll introduce that in this practice now actually, is when you find yourself getting drowsy, then to sharpen the focus, to pay closer attention, but of course without contracting, without getting tense. So just pay closer attention, sharpen the focus. It's a little bit like now, if at home in the evening, if we're watching a boring program on TV, what happens? No? But what happens when we're watching an interesting program on TV? We're like completely there, aren't we? So same here. And that actually goes back to the point here, which I didn't really talk about before, is already we talked about what do we do if we get distracted? First thing is just relax, release the distraction and return to the object. Keep doing that. But what happens if we get dull? And again, one of the main reasons, there are many reasons, of course, why we get dull. One, of course, is we're not getting enough sleep, which is often the case in the modern world. But one of the most common reasons we get dull in practice is like watching a boring program on TV. We just lost interest. So if we're not interested in the practice, we go and we get very dull. So that's what refresh means, is if we notice we're getting dull because we've lost enthusiasm, reflect on the benefits of the practice. Appreciate that this practice is going to bring us a lot of benefit. And then we'll have the faith and the aspiration, and then we'll put the effort. And then we'll refresh our interest in the practice by understanding the benefits. Because if we don't have this, you'll just constantly get dull because you're not interested. So refresh interest if you've lost that. Restore your attention, mean pay closer attention to the object without tightening, of course, staying relaxed, and then make sure you retain that flow of mindfulness on the object. So that is the first level. What we can do, as you mentioned, with this practice, but particularly the practice we're going to introduce shortly, in the resting in awareness practice is more relevant what you've explained, but you can do that in this practice, is to simply be aware of the dullness. Because if we can pay close attention to the dullness, we're not caught up in it, are we? But that's not so easy as a beginner. But what you'll find, particularly with the next practice we're going to do, as we get into the practice, you can actually use this approach. Instead of sharpening the focus on the object, particularly because the object in the next practice is awareness itself, so we're not actually focusing on an object. Here, with the mind practice and the breath practice, it makes much more sense to pay closer attention to the object. But in the next practice, we're turning awareness in upon itself. And so then what you've described would be the practice of overcoming dullness is just look at that dullness, because that's part of the awareness. Is just pay close attention to that dullness, and then we're free of it. Okay, let's do the practice now. So 15 minutes. Again, if we get caught up, relax, release, return. And if you're finding that you're getting caught up a lot, you might like to experiment with one of these three things here. Either labeling, noting, going back in the body, anchoring in the breath, have that as your main focus, and a little bit in the corner of the mind, notice your thoughts, or every so often generate a thought and watch that. So you might like to experiment with one of those if you're getting swept away a lot. But let's do that practice, 15 minutes. So as always, we begin by preparing the body. Finding that nice, comfortable posture. Back straight and body relaxed. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Simply allowing the breath to flow naturally and effortlessly. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Allowing the eyes to be at least partially open. Resting your gaze in the space in front of you. Keeping the eyes soft and relaxed. And now bring your attention to your own mind. And observe your own mind and whatever is arising in the space of the mind. Simply be like an impartial observer or witness, observing thoughts and other mental events as they arise and pass. If you're finding that you're constantly getting caught up in your thoughts, you might like to experiment with labeling or noting. That is, give a name to the mental event, such as thought, image, memory, frustration, and so on. And that way to have some space from the mental event. Or alternatively, if you prefer, you can go back into the body and anchor yourself in the rhythm of the breath. That is, mainly focus on the rhythm of the breath and a little bit in the corner of the mind, observing the thoughts. And if you're simply falling into dullness or drowsiness, then elevate your gaze and sharpen your focus, paying closer attention to your thoughts. one more point about this practice, and maybe if there's some more questions. This morning we looked at this 9-stage model which describes the stages of progress in shamatha practice. And this is sort of typically the classical model that's used, particularly if we're using an object such as the breath. In this practice, the stages of progress in this shamatha practice, often you won't see this model used, but a different model is used. And that's typically what's called a 4-stage model. And in this model used to describe the stages of progress in this shamatha practice, the first stage of the practice is the waterfall experience, meaning what we tend to notice at the beginning of this practice is one thought after the other, crashing down on us like a waterfall of thoughts, non-stop. But if we sit there and just watch that, what you'll notice over time will move to the next stage of practice, and that is that the mental events will be more like a fast-flowing river. So there'll still be quite a lot, but not as intense as before. They'll start to slow down just a little bit, but it's like a fast-flowing river. Still quite a lot of mental activity going on. And if we keep watching that, the experience will be one more like a slow-moving river. So what you're going to start to notice here is there'll be more and more gaps between when one thought finishes and the next thought starts. So there'll be less mental activity and it'll start to slow down, more like a slow-moving river. And if we keep watching, then that slow-moving river of thoughts will empty into a still lake, that our mind will become completely still and quiet. So this is often the model that's used to describe the stages of progress in this practice. So any last questions about this practice before we move to the next practice, this next shamatha practice of resting in awareness? Any last questions about this practice, observing the mind?
When you say to the 4th stage, the still lake,
Yeah.
all stages has thoughts, right?
No, there's no thoughts here. It's completely quiet. The mind has gone completely quiet. For us, that's the only time when our mind goes completely quiet is when we're asleep, or we've get some medication, some Valium or something to knock the mind on the head. Other than that, or our mind is completely dull. Then it's sort of still. But for us to really have this experience, I mean, of course, now we have a little taste of it. I mean, even now in this practice, you may have noticed there's maybe a few seconds where mind is suddenly quite still. But the thing is that if we can watch these thoughts and mental events, and we're not following or trying to suppress, we're not feeding them. So the habit of all this stuff coming up will get weaker and weaker and weaker, and our mind will naturally become quiet and still. So you'll find here that you'll be meditating and the mind will be completely still.
Just a follow-up question. I was thinking when we
Which
started,
means, let me just finish,
Yeah.
which means, wouldn't that be a fantastic situation to have in daily life? That our default mode is a still mind, and that we only think when we need to think, instead of now the mind is constantly going blah, 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 blah all day long, annoying us, and it's tiring. So wouldn't it be better just to have a completely still mind and then only think when we're in control? We think when we need to think. Other than that, we're in still mode. Fantastic. Now go on.
Yeah, so I was under the impression when we started that the idea is not to suppress or not to have thoughts.
Correct.
So this was contradicting with me, but I think you corrected with the last statement that it's not like no thoughts, but have a thought when you want it.
Exactly. So this, if we can achieve this sort of experience in meditation, what that will mean in daily life is we'll really be able to, most of the time during the day when we don't need to think, the mind will be still. It won't be going blah, 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 blah all day long, which is tiring, no? Okay. Yeah.
Well, this is not personal. I don't know if it relates to what other people feel. But for me, like the idea of going to work every day, in some kind of remunerative work, it has its own satisfaction, and then you come home, you're tired, you go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
Or you do a little practice if you have any.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, to me, that sounds like a luxury.
What's a luxury?
To be able to go somewhere, work, expend your energies,
Right.
only focus on something,
Right.
and come back, and it pays you for doing that.
Right.
Whereas when you told us to watch our thoughts, to
Watch the
be aware of
thoughts.
the thing and let them arise,
Right.
and then sit back to where they came from and just say there's a thought.
Right.
For me, like 101 nagging thoughts came up, nagging thoughts, things I haven't done.
Right. Because now there's a lot of things where we don't know how to deal with it, so what do? We suppress. We're suppressing, whether we know or not. We're suppressing so much stuff. And so here in this practice, we let go of that. So all this stuff will whoosh. But that's okay, because suppressing causes so much problems in our life. A lot of suppressed mental things manifest as physical illness. A lot of modern day physical illness is suppressed anger, suppressed fear, suppressed all sorts of things. So it needs to come out. And again, if we can learn this practice well, then no matter how strong this stuff is, if we can watch it, it can't harm us. Because thoughts, emotions, and memories from their own side have zero power to harm us. Zero. They only have power if we give them power. And we give them power either by identifying with them and following them or trying to suppress them. Then they have a lot of power to harm us. But if we can learn this practice well, then no matter what comes up, no matter how strong it is, we can be fully present with it without being overwhelmed. And every time we're present with it, then we can let it go. And a lot of healing in our mind is that's the first step. Because a lot of things that haunt us and torture us is this, suppressing stuff, not acknowledging. But if we can watch this, we can be free of it, or at least start the healing process. So yes, one of the common things, that's why the first experience is waterfall. Because we have such a strong habit of either following or suppressing. So if we stop that, that's what we're going to notice, a waterfall of thoughts. But that's fine. That's the first stage of progress in this practice. Right down the back.
Is this mindful meditation on the mind to be done simultaneously with other? We can do it or
simultaneously with...
Like I do on breath or I do on abdomen.
So,
do I do this?
Yeah. So remember we said earlier that with Shamatha practice, the general recommendation is use the object that works best for you. So what I would recommend is with each of these practices is learn them well. I mean, don't just do them once and go, well, that's not really for me. We're not giving it a fair trial. So what I would recommend is each one of these practices, do it as your standard shamatha practice every day for a number of weeks. So that you know the practice well, you get a bit of a feel for the practice. And if you do each one of these for a number of weeks, then after that period we'll go, okay, I think this particular shamatha practice is the one that's going to be most effective for me now, and then use that as your shamatha practice. Which if it turns out that this is your practice, then you would use this as your shamatha practice, and you wouldn't use the breath as your shamatha practice. So therefore use the object that works best for you. But learn these practices well first, because each one has its own benefits. The breath helps us get us out of the conceptual mind. This helps us to become the masters of our mind. And the one we're going to do now is really going to help us to have this open, spacious stillness. So that's sort of the recommendation.
If we shuffle them, like
Shuffle.
yeah, like 5-10 minutes one, then 5-10 minutes another, not in a particular order.
Then if we do that, we'll become the jack of all trades and the master of none. I mean, if you want to be the jack of all trades, that's good. But I think we want to become the master of our mind. So then pick one and stick with it.
So Jimmy, actually, Glenn, it's actually happening with me. So I'm like observing, here, something on my breath, and then suddenly I wander, go around, come back, and then suddenly I think I go on my stomach. Oh, then I say.
Right, because we haven't developed a habit.
Your breath, and then you are here, there.
It's just a habit.
So in a way, I'm actually going through that phase.
Exactly, because that is our habit now. What is our habit in daily life? Some sound comes, go. Thought comes, go. Something here comes, go. We're just jumping all over the place. Is that helpful? No, absolutely not. I mean, it's torturing us. So therefore, we need to develop a new habit. And this is what this is about. So if you're using the mind practice, you think that's going to be the best. And let's say you did some breath practice before for some months, so your habit is the breath. What's going to happen for sure is when you start observing the mind, you'll go to the breath. But then you come back. You go to the breath, you come back. You go to the breath, you come back. You're developing a new habit. It'll take time. But every time we come back, we're developing a new habit. And then you'll find over weeks or months, this won't happen anymore. You'll be observing the mind quite well, occasionally some distraction, but you'll come back quickly. You just have to develop a new habit. That's all. I mean, it takes time. Like the great Indian master Shantideva says, no matter how difficult something seems, everything with practice becomes easy. But if you don't practice, it will be difficult. It'll stay difficult. I mean, if we want to learn to play the piano, if we don't practice, we're never going to become good at playing the piano. But if we keep practicing every day diligently, after some months or years, we'll be very good at it. Same with this. If we practice every day for some months or years, we'll be very good at it.
About watching the emotions, you said you just observe them. But I've also read that every emotion is felt as a sensation in the body.
Right.
And I've always been confused, where is the sensation?
Right.
Emotion?
Right. So emotions, of course, are mental events. But as you rightly said, particularly if it's a strong emotion, there'll be a physical effect in the body. The physical effect is not the emotion. We don't have emotions in the chest. We have the physical effects of anger and jealousy and craving, maybe here or here or here or here, for sure. And what we can do, and again, this is as part of a short-term strategy here, is that often people easily get caught up in emotions because that's our strong habit. And so to say, watch your anger, if we have a big, strong habit of anger, that's not going to be easy. So as a temporary short-term strategy, not as the long-term solution, a temporary short-term strategy, if you can't watch your emotions, you're just getting caught up, then go into the body and watch what's happening in the body corresponding to that emotion. Watch that, that's easier.
Breathe into that area or something like
Well,
that.
but this is some other practice. I mean, this is dealing with emotions. Here we're just watching. So breathing into things, and that's vipassana, that's compassion, that's other practice. That's great, but here we're just watching. So as part of watching emotions, if we find we're getting caught up, as a temporary short-term strategy, we can go to the body and just watch what's happening in the body corresponding to that emotion. As a short-term strategy.
Practice also has its purpose in another.
Of course. That's like investigating emotions, where they're coming from, why they're there. They're all great, but that's a different practice. So here in Shamatha, we don't want to do any of that. because then we're doing another practice. We're not doing shamatha. Remember, this practice, the purpose is simply to develop single-pointed concentration. It's not to understand our emotions, to know why they're there, where they're coming from. This is other practice.
How can we differentiate between a state of no thoughts and still lake?
Well, a still lake is no thoughts, but remember, for us as beginner, no thoughts is sometimes because our mind is completely dull. So if we notice that our mind is dull, sharpen. Sometimes we're lacking, and sometimes we're too intense, we're suffocating. So like we saw before, we just need to see whether it's because of dullness, tension, that there's no thoughts.
You said that all the three, like breathing meditation, has its benefit. Like spaciousness is for the awareness. Like breathing is for no conceptualization. Is the result?
They're all with whether you're using the breath, the mind, awareness, an image of a Buddha, whatever you're using, the result is the same. The result is when we achieve shamatha, our mind will be completely still, clear, and focused. Whether we started with the breath, whether we were observing the mind, resting in awareness, have a mental image of a Buddha, they all come to the same result.
So therefore I can select anything which suits me.
Absolutely, and that's the recommendation. Okay, let's go to the next practice. We're running out of time. So the next practice is the shamatha practice of resting in awareness. So in the breath practice, we are aware of the sensations of the breath. In the mind practice, which we just did, we are aware of our thoughts and emotions and so forth. In this practice, we're turning awareness in upon itself and just knowing that we're aware. Many people find this more challenging because it's actually too simple. It's too simple because this practice basically involves doing nothing. We don't know how to do nothing. We always want to do something. And because this practice is so simple, people find it challenging. So all we need to do is get out of doing mode into being mode. So all we're doing, all that's happening in this practice is just we're knowing that we're aware. That's it. Now, of course, in this practice, just knowing that we're aware, of course, thoughts, emotions, memories, sounds, sensations will continue to arise, of course. So in this practice, though, we're not paying attention to any appearance. We're not trying to block them. Let them be there. Thoughts can be there. Sounds can be there. Sensation can be there. We're just not interested in them. So pay no attention to any appearance at all. Let them be there. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. That's it. Like the previous practice we just did, very much recommended to have the eyes open for the same reasons. So either naturally or partially resting in the space in front of us. And so the goal of this practice, of course, is also, like the breath practice, the mind practice, to cultivate a calm, clear, focused mind. One last point, and then we'll go to the practice. We said that relaxation is the basis of all shamatha practice. This practice is probably the practice that most requires to be super relaxed. Because if we're not relaxed in this practice, we push into doing mode. If we tense the body or mind, we're already in doing mode. So this practice, the harder we try, the more difficult it becomes. So don't try hard. Just relax. Just completely relax. And in that complete relaxation, just know that you're aware. That's it. Don't try harder. So let's do that practice. And then I've got a couple of things to say after the practice. So 15 minutes again. setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Allowing the eyes to be at least partially open, resting your gaze in the space in front of you. And then simply releasing all appearances. Allow the mind to come to rest. Not doing anything at all. Simply being present. Knowing that you're aware. All sorts of appearances will continue to arise. thoughts, emotions, sounds, sensations, and so on. But now pay no attention to any appearance. We're not trying to block them. Let them be there. They can be there. We're simply not interested in them. The only thing we're interested in is knowing that we're aware. Now, if you find that you're getting caught up in any agitation, tension, or distraction, then release awareness into space, releasing all appearances and relaxing completely. Or if you're finding that you're simply falling into dullness or drowsiness, then arouse and refresh your focus, sharpen your focus, knowing that you're aware. And simply rest in that stillness of awareness. And if you're completely lost in this practice, go back into the body and anchor yourself in the rhythm of the breath. So have that as your main focus. And simply notice a little bit in the corner of the mind the stillness that surrounds and pervades that experience. Any questions before we take our afternoon tea break?
Yeah. In this practice, if you just take, I was aware of the sounds, of course. I was, listening to them sounds. There was really no sensation, but of course the breath was also there. Was of course there. Also because I've been practicing on the breath for many years now. So, and thoughts were not that many, but often when I meditate, I get these images, and there are no thoughts. The mind is like the images coming. Could be anything, animals, some person. Sometimes it's scary figures actually. So, is that how this meditation is done? The awareness meditation?
So remember, this shamatha practice is we're turning awareness in upon itself. So in this practice, we're not interested in any appearances. We're not focusing on sounds, we're not focusing on thoughts, we're not focusing on emotions, we're not focusing on images. If we're focusing on any appearance, we're distracted. Of course they'll be there, but let them be there. We're just not interested in them. So how do we know if we're doing this practice correctly? If we're focusing on any appearance, we're distracted. Meaning if we're focusing on a sound, a sensation, a thought, emotion, an image, we're out of the practice. So let that go and just come back to knowing we're aware. Or if we've gone completely dull, meaning our mind is blank and nothing's registering at all. In fact, if nothing's registering, it's only later we go, oh, hang on, what went on there? We're completely dull. So we need to then sharpen the focus. So to practice correctly is just know that we're aware and not pay attention to any appearance. Then we're doing the practice correctly.
So, not going on the word awareness. So I feel it's just a feeling and it's just a knowing that I keep coming back to.
So we're resting in the knowing, not feeling.
Like knowing,
A
yes,
feeling
knowing,
is an appearance.
Like knowing.
Yeah. Just know that you're aware.
Right.
Of course, with that you may have some sort of feeling, but then that's an appearance.
Right.
So we're not trying to have some sort of feeling.
I just mean knowing, like.
Yeah,
I
that's
keep
it.
coming
That's
back
it.
to that knowing that okay, I'm
Just
back.
know that you're aware. Know that you're conscious, that you haven't passed out. That's it.
Right. Is the over application of this also like just I keep coming back.
But as a beginner, most of us will probably need to come back because as soon as any appearance arises, we'll go there. We'll be focused. We'll feel. We'll be focusing on a sensation. We'll be listening to a sound. We'll be focusing on a thought. So for most of us, initially there'll be this constant letting go and coming back.
I feel I'm doing it like really like over.
But again, we need to correct any shamatha practice, but the basis here is relaxation. If we try hard in this practice, it'll get much more difficult because you're going into doing mode. And if you tense, that's going to cause all sorts of appearances and get caught up. So the key for this practice is be super relaxed. I mean, as relaxed as possible. Err on the side of dullness in this practice. If you think you just relax more. Just keep relaxing. And while you're relaxing, just maintain that very subtle awareness of knowing you're aware. Because as long as if you tighten on that, and then of course it'll be difficult, and then you'll tighten more, and then you get frustrated, you get upset, and then you're completely gone. So just really the key here for this practice is just relaxation. Just keep relaxing as much as possible. While you're doing that, just very, very gently knowing that you're aware at all time. That's it.
I have a feeling that I'm looking at me from the outside. Is that a distraction?
So that's an appearance. So just let that go. Let it go.
So this resting in awareness, this meditation, doesn't seem different from the breath meditation.
Well, the breath meditation, we're focusing on an object, the sensations of the breath. In this one, we're not focusing on any appearance. all of these practices, as we saw, come to the same point. But they're coming from different sort of...
The same point is,
Well, I mean, eventually all of these practices, whether you're focusing on the breath, the mind, or resting in awareness, the end point is you'll be resting in stillness. That's the end point.
So the second practice, the mind and resting in awareness. So as the thought goes and before the second thought comes, there's a gap, right, between two thoughts. And this very practice, we have to look at that gap, right? We have to be aware of that gap. Is that the emptiness or shunyata?
No. See, in that mind practice, and then we need a tea break, the mind practice, we have sometimes a gap, and that we watch that. But actually in this practice, awareness is still, but awareness is there all the time, whether there's a thought or not, isn't it? I mean, isn't there awareness there when there's a thought? And that awareness that's there during the thought is movement, yeah? But that awareness that is present with the thought, that's still, isn't it?
Come again, awareness that is present with the thought.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have thought without awareness, no?
Yeah.
But the awareness that's present, I mean, a thought is movement.
Yeah.
The awareness that's present during the thought, is that moving awareness? No.
Yeah,
Thought is moving, but awareness is still.
Yeah.
So we're resting in that stillness all the time in this practice. Whereas in the mind practice, the only time we see stillness is in between thoughts.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at appearances, we're looking at objects. So when we're looking at objects, there's movement. But here in this practice, we're not looking at objects, so we're turning awareness in upon itself, and awareness is always there, and awareness is always still. So in this practice, we're resting in stillness 24/7. In the mind practice, we're not. Where there's a lot of movement we're focusing on. Okay, we need a break. We've run over time. Let's have a tea break. Come back at 4. We'll do this practice again. I want to add a little bit more, and then the rest of the section we'll look at how to integrate these things into daily life. But let's take a tea break.